Everybody thinks Lehman Brothers died because of subprime mortgages. That's not the full story. 6 months before Lehman collapsed, the U.S. government helped rescue Bear Stearns. One day after Lehman filed for bankruptcy, the same government handed AIG an $85 billion lifeline. A few weeks later, it put $700 billion on the table for almost everyone else. Same crisis, same regulators, same phone calls. One bank was allowed to die, exactly one, and the reason why is not the one you've been told. Lehman Brothers didn't just fail, somebody decided not to catch it. Today we're going to find out who and why. First, let's be fair to the people who made that decision. Lehman was a mess. By 2008, Lehman Brothers was 158 years old. It had survived the Civil War, 2 world wars, and the Great Depression, and it was running on a leverage ratio of roughly 30-to-1. Here's what that means. Explain like you're 5. Imagine buying a $600,000 house with $20,000 of your own money. Everything else is borrowed. If the house goes up 3%, you've almost doubled your money. You're a genius. But if the house drops 3%, your $20,000 is gone. Not reduced, gone. You're wiped out by a rounding error. That was Lehman. And what was the house? Commercial real estate and mortgage-backed securities, the exact assets that were falling. It gets worse. According to the Valukas report, the Examiner's investigation published in 2010, Lehman used an accounting technique called Repo 105 to temporarily move around $50 billion of assets off its balance sheet right before reporting to investors. Think of it like this. Your parents are coming over, so you shove all the mess into a closet, take the photo, then pull it all back out. The room was never clean. The photo was. So yes, Lehman was sick. But here's the problem with that explanation. So was everybody else. Merrill Lynch was carrying the same kind of assets and got sold in a panic that same weekend. Citigroup would need multiple government interventions within months. Morgan Stanley and Goldman Sachs both converted into bank holding companies days later, specifically so they could access emergency support. In other words, Lehman was reckless, explains why Lehman was in danger. It does not explain why Lehman was the only one that was allowed to actually die. Every argument you'll hear for letting Lehman fail applies, almost word for word, to at least 3 other firms that got saved. We're minutes away from finding out who actually signed Lehman's death warrant. If you want the next autopsy too, subscribe. It's free and it takes 1 second. The official explanation goes like this. The Federal Reserve wanted to save Lehman, but legally it couldn't. To lend, the Fed needed sufficient collateral, and Lehman simply didn't have enough good assets to put up. Clean. Legal. Case closed, right? Wrong. Because 48 hours later, the same Federal Reserve lent $85 billion to AIG. AIG was not a healthy company with a liquidity hiccup. It was an insurance giant that had written insurance on assets that were collapsing, and it had no idea how much it owed. 2 days apart, same institution, same legal framework, opposite answers. Defenders of the decision will tell you AIG had real, sellable subsidiaries to pledge, and Lehman didn't. That's a serious argument, and it may well be true. But notice what it actually means. The collateral rule wasn't a wall, it was a judgment call. Someone had to decide what counted as good enough. And judgment calls have reasons. Reasons that aren't written in any statute. Which brings us to the second story you've been told. The second explanation is that this was a surprise. A bolt from the blue. Nobody could have known. Let's check the calendar. March 2008. Bear Stearns, a bank with a very similar business model, collapses in about 72 hours and has to be rescued. Every trader on Wall Street immediately asks the same question. Who's next? And the answer everyone gives is Lehman. Spring 2008. Short sellers publicly bet against Lehman and say out loud that its real estate is worth far less than it claims. June. Lehman reports a loss of nearly $3 billion in a single quarter. Summer. Lehman looks for a buyer, Korean investors, sovereign funds, anyone, and comes back empty-handed. So no, this wasn't a surprise. Regulators had 6 months of warning, a live rehearsal with Bear Stearns, and a bank openly begging for a partner. Everybody saw it coming. Nobody moved, which means the real question was, never could they save Lehman. It's why they chose not to. There's a third answer people give, and it's the most emotionally satisfying one. Lehman deserved it. They gambled, they lost. That's capitalism. Fine. But then the same rule has to apply to AIG, which had insured the gamble. and to the banks that packaged the mortgages, and to the ratings agencies that stamped them safe. If they deserved it were really the principal, September 2008 would have been a massacre. Instead, exactly one firm got the lesson, and everyone else got a check. A rule that applies to one company isn't a rule. It's a choice. Friday, September 12th, 2008. The heads of Wall Street are summoned to the New York Fed. The message from the Treasury Secretary is blunt. There will be no government money in this deal. If you want to save Lehman, you pay for it yourselves. That single sentence changes everything, because two buyers were circling, Bank of America and Barclays. And both of them wanted the same thing Bear Stearns' buyer had received: a public guarantee against the toxic assets. No guarantee, no deal. Saturday, Bank of America walks away and buys Merrill Lynch instead. One buyer left. Sunday, Barclays says yes. Then British regulators refuse to let it proceed without a shareholder vote that couldn't happen in time. The UK Chancellor is reported to have said Britain would not, quote, import the American cancer. Last buyer gone. Lehman has hours. So why no guarantee? Here's the uncomfortable part. 6 months earlier, the Bear Stearns rescue had been savaged in the press and in Congress. Wall Street gambles, taxpayers pay. Officials were being called Mr. Bailout. It was an election year. And economists had a respectable word for the fear driving them: moral hazard. If you always rescue the reckless, you guarantee more recklessness. There's also the human layer. Lehman's CEO, Dick Fuld, had spent years making enemies on Wall Street and had refused earlier offers he considered insulting. Added up, a politically toxic bailout climate, an election, a genuine principle, and a CEO nobody wanted to rescue. Lehman didn't die of an accident. It died of a decision. Now for the part that makes the decision look very different in hindsight. Monday, September 15th, 1:45 in the morning. Lehman files for bankruptcy. $639 billion in assets, the largest bankruptcy in American history. Within 24 hours, a money market fund that held Lehman debt falls below $1 a share. It breaks the buck. And small investors realize the safest product in finance isn't safe. Short-term lending between companies freezes. Firms with nothing to do with mortgages suddenly can't make payroll. The next day, the government rescues AIG for $85 billion. 2 weeks later, Congress passes a $700 billion rescue program. Then come guarantees, liquidity lines, and central bank interventions around the world, running into the trillions. So here's the paradox. Lehman was allowed to die in order to avoid rewarding reckless banks. And what followed was the largest, most generalized bank rescue in history. Would saving Lehman have prevented all of that? Honestly, we can't know. Serious economists still disagree. Some argue the collapse was the necessary shock that finally forced Congress to act. Others argue it turned a severe crisis into a global one. Because the bill didn't stop at Wall Street, American households lost trillions of dollars in wealth in the crisis that followed. Unemployment climbed to around 10%. Millions of families lost their homes. And Lehman's own bankruptcy took years to unwind, burning billions in legal and administrative fees along the way. So the moral hazard argument was, we can't afford to reward bad behavior. What it produced was a rescue program so large it needed an act of Congress, and a recession that hit people who had never heard the word leverage in their lives. But nobody argues it was cheap. So what do we actually learn from Lehman? That in a financial panic, the line between too big to fail and let it go is not an economic line, it's a political one. It gets drawn in a weekend by exhausted people under public pressure in an election year, and then it gets explained afterwards as if it had been a rule all along. Lehman wasn't the sickest bank on Wall Street. It was the one that ran out of road at the exact moment saving banks became politically impossible. Everybody thinks Lehman died because of subprime mortgages. Lehman died because of timing. And Lehman is not the last body on this table. There's a whole century of them. Companies that lied, bubbles that burst, and men who walked away rich while everyone else paid. So tell me in the comments which one you want open next. I read every single one.